Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing and Lily. Happy Chinese New Year to all my subs and all my viewers. Hopefully, you'll have a great 2025 year of the snake. So, today we're going to be talking about Caneloalvarez, Terence Crawford, Naoyainoue, the monster, and much, much more. So, stay tuned to that. Feel free to leave comments in the comment section. Engage at your will. Welcome back. I'm watching highlights of Columbus versus Montverde, number 1 versus 3 high school matchup. Of course, Columbus is doing well this year because Cooper Flag is no longer part of Montverde. They're putting a ass kicking on Montverde this year. They look like a good team, stacked, but I still don't think the Boozer brothers are that great. The bigger one, obviously, I think will be in the NBA. The smaller one, I don't think he's that good. I don't think he will make the league. But stay tuned to my basketball channel, Sean on Ball, and you can find out more about my basketball takes as well. So let's get to this. So obviously, it's been a bit of a slow January, but this weekend we have quite a bit to talk about. We're going to be talking about all the potential matchups and fights that are happening tomorrow, and of course, Inouye's fight that happened yesterday. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the up and coming fights that we're going to see this February. February is going to be off the chain. It is a great beginning for 2025. So let's get to it right now. So obviously, one of the biggest news being discussed right now is this fight, Caneloalvarez versus Terence Crawford. From what we've heard, September is the date. We're not sure if these guys are going to be fighting before that to, sort of have an interim fight or exactly what's going to happen. The rumors on the street are this fight is not going to happen in Saudi Arabia, but it is going to be happening in Vegas. So a lot of the Saudi haters, they should be happy because this fight is not being taken away from America and American boxing fans. All those guys that want to buy hotels and plane tickets and go to Vegas to watch this fight can, and there's no problem with regards to that. So congratulations to you. You can now fulfill your dreams of watching boxing live. As far as the fight, I'm on record already saying that, if Terence Crawford really wants this fight, I'm cool. This just shows you the kind of guy Terence Crawford is. He's hungry to prove himself. He's super confident. He feels that literally nobody in boxing can beat him. And you got to really respect a guy with that kind of fucking drive and mentality. As far as Caneloalvarez, we understood why he wasn't really intrigued or interested in this fight because what was the benefit for him? Right? If he fights Terence Crawford, who obviously is the smaller fighter coming up in weight, he's not going to get credit for it, even though years down the road he will. When people see Terence Crawford's name on his resume and if Canelo beats him, people will see the significance of that. So it's mostly these racially charged American fans that look for any way to downplay fighters like Canelo Alvarez and others. And the truth is, this is a great fight. I mean, I definitely see how Terence Crawford can win this fight. I have a video a few months ago where I was talking about how I think Terence Crawford could beat Canelo Alvarez. So, I would not be shocked or surprised at all if Bud Crawford goes in there and beats Canelo. And I don't think that's a negative towards Canelo Alvarez, right? Because styles make fights. Crawford is long, fast, very skilled fighter. If he still has his legs, he definitely has everything he needs in his toolbox to win this fight. For Canelo, this is a dangerous opponent. When he moved up in weight, he no longer had to deal with faster, more athletic guys that were able to use their legs and stay outside the pocket and force him to chase them. Right? He was able to fight bigger guys who weren't that fast, specifically with their feet, and he was able to obviously do far better against them because he had better hand speed, and obviously, his endurance wasn't such an issue at bigger weights as it was when he was draining himself down in weight. So it's a very intriguing fight. Um, I don't really mind whoever wins. If Crawford wins, this just confirms and solidifies him moving back up past Usyk for pound number one. If Canelo wins, I think this just puts him back into the top three, along with Usyk and Inoue for pound top three. And Bud Crawford would obviously fall on the list based on losing to another fighter. Um, but we will see what happens. I mean, this is exciting. This is the kind of fight that will really get a lot of attention from American boxing fans. I know a lot of people say, Canelo ducked David Benavidez to cherry pick a smaller fighter. These are the same people. It doesn't matter what he does. He could fight better BF next, and they would fucking criticize him for fighting a 40-year-old. So, we know what time it is, to quote Dante Boxing Nation. The truth is, Canelo can do no right, right? And if you ask some American fans, Bud Crawford can do no right. So both of these guys don't really have a lot of the love from American boxing fans that some others do. It is what it is. But nonetheless, it's still a great fight. I'm excited. This fight in September, dynamite, fire. And obviously on DAZN, making it far easier for me, not being an American, to actually watch this fight. But let's move forward. Obviously, we got lots to discuss. This is going to be a fight we're talking about for the next 6 to 8 to 10 months. So, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of videos talking about this as we move forward. Yes, who is next for Naoyainoue? He just obviously beat Kim, the Korean replacement opponent for Sam Goodman. I know people were critical and criticizing Sam Goodman, but let's not push that bullshit. Sam Goodman beat a guy that some people said was the fucking killer at 122 pounds in Reese Aleem. Reese Aleem was a guy that people were really hyping up until Sam Goodman beat him. And now nobody talks about Reese Aleem at all. And they try to disrespect and downplay Sam Goodman. But Sam Goodman was a mandatory opponent in 2 sanctioning bodies, showing you that he's literally earned the opportunity to face Inoue. But unfortunately, because of his team and him doing some stupid shit, he ended up getting cut. And that fight and that big money payday is no longer in front of him. So we'll see how he recovers and what he does next. But yeah, that was really dropping the ball on his team. Kim, obviously the replacement opponent, was fighting on the undercard, so he was more than excited to jump in and take on one of the best fighters in boxing today for easily the biggest payday of his career. And so, hats off to him. He had obviously a tough luck story as a kid, being an orphan, growing up his whole life in an orphanage, never being adopted, and obviously have to going through quite a bit. So it's made him a tough kid. And I'm happy to see him finally, get a good payday, and hopefully he can, use that to continue to build up his life and, move on to have a better life as an adult than he had as a kid. For Inoue, he did exactly what we thought he would do: go in there and get a sensational knockout against this kid. And that's what he did. It is just a run-of-the-mill fight. Top fighters fight guys that aren't necessarily elite, and this is what you expect them to do: roll over guys, right? We always know somebody's going to fight guys that maybe aren't fan favorites, but that's part of boxing. Historically, it's been that way. So let's not pick and choose. Inoue didn't choose to fight this guy. Unfortunately, his mandatory for the second time in a row had to pull out, actually for the third time in a row. So this was just a stay busy fight. Obviously, you've been training, so you might as well reap the benefit of getting in the ring and doing what you've been practicing for and getting a payday in the process, and showcasing to your fans, your loving, adoring fans, your sensational power. And that's what he did. Now, rumor on the street, and it's pretty much confirmed, is that Inoue is going to be fighting in Vegas later on this year against David Picasso. A lot of people are hating on that, saying, who the hell is David Picasso? But let's be honest. If you're trying to sell it to a Mexican-American fan base in Vegas, who's going to sell more tickets and get more interest from this fan base? A Uzbekistani fighter that nobody knows, or a Mexican fighter? Obviously, that's why he's fighting the Mexican fighter, who's also his WBC mandatory. So not only do you check off the WBC mandatory box, but you get an opponent that actually boxing fans from that region will be far more interested in supporting, right? Because people love to support their own. Unfortunately, in the US, especially in Vegas, the southern part of the states, there's not a lot of Uzbekistanians that are going to support MJ. Right? People will try to spin it and twist it, but they're just mental cases who don't understand the business of boxing. MJ, if he would have won his fight against the Palace, would have already had his fight against Inouye, but he lost. And now he's had to wait in line to get his opportunity. It's as easy as that, as simple as that. He also hasn't been that busy either, right? Injuries and inactivity have really sort of dulled his name. And I'm an MJ fan. So if I'm saying that, it's not coming from a place of hate. I've been a supporter of his from day one. I felt he would have beat Stephen Fulton, right? And I was upset that that fight never happened. And a lot of the blame went to MJ in that case as well. Um, but there's good news on the horizon. We know that Inouye has stated that his third fight in 2025 is going to be happening in Saudi Arabia. So one fight in Japan, one fight in the US, one fight in Saudi Arabia. And most of us felt that this was obvious, that this was what was going to happen. Obviously, he just signed an agreement with Turkey Al-Sheikh. So you assume that one of those situations meant actually coming to Saudi Arabia to perform in front of the Saudis. And that's exactly what's going to happen probably later on in the year, November or December. And the most likely opponent at that time will be MJ, because MJ, being Uzbekistanian, right, Muslim, is just an obvious opponent for Turkey, who loves to make big fights and fights that boxing fans want to see. And obviously, the one fight at 122 pounds that boxing fans want to see is MJ versus Inouye. And it's a great matchup, a very underrated matchup, to be fair. MJ has got power, speed, long amateur pedigree, gold medal Olympian, unified world champion. So obviously he's got quite a bit of skill set on his side, and it's going to be a very interesting matchup. And interesting as well because for Inouye, he's obviously fighting a guy who's not much bigger than him, which is something that obviously he's had to deal with since moving to 122. As far as the Junto Nakatani fight, well, that seems as if that's going to be a fight in 2026. We will see if Bob Arum lives up to his word and does the doubleheader in Vegas with Junto fighting somebody, hopefully a unification fight, and Inouye versus obviously David Picasso, because that would be sensational. It'd be a great way to actually build up the matchup between these two fighters, and it would be a no-brainer as far as a great card to go see in the U.S., right, to see these two pending opponents actually matching up. And we know that obviously Junto trains and lives primarily in the US. So for him, it's a no-brainer to actually fight in the States as well. Vegas, on the undercard of the Monster, that's a very significant fight for a young guy's career. So I hope that is what happens, but we'll have to see. Obviously, Junto has a fight coming up soon, and we will see what happens after that. We do hope, though, of course, that he does start to unify titles at 118 pounds, which I feel confident that he will. Let's move on. Interesting enough, obviously, Tank Davis came out with a tweet to, give Inouye some, shout out. And that's a nice thing for Tank Davis. Tank Davis always has talked about how he really respects and is entertained and likes to watch Inouye fight. And obviously, it's great that he comes out on social media on X and puts out, "Yo, Inouye, good luck, fam." Right? It's great to see boxers support boxers. Right? Like when Shakur did that for Bam Rodriguez. It's fantastic. Of course, you had guys like Dante's Boxing Nation who tried to turn it into a race thing. Why is this black fighter supporting a Mexican? Would the Mexican fighter support the black fighter? So let's see if he comes out and does the same thing with regards to Tank Davis supporting an Asian fighter. And would the Asian fighter support a black fighter? I have no doubt that Bam and Inouye would support Shakur and Tank Davis and also throw out social media tweets on X. I have no doubt at all. As far as this tweet, obviously, it ended up getting a bunch of typical response that Tank Davis is trying to cherry pick Inoue. And obviously, people talking about how Inoue has to move up and fight Tank Davis, right? The haters shitting on Tank Davis because he's trying to cherry pick a 122-pound fighter. And of course, the haters of Inoue acting like Inoue obviously has to go straight up after this fight to 135 to take on Tank. And neither of these are true. And neither of them have any reality in the boxing world. Inoue does not need to go up to face Tank Davis. It's the farthest thing from the truth. A Junto Nakatani fight in Japan is fucking the biggest fight in Japanese boxing history. Inoue does not need to go up to fight Tank Davis. Then when he moves up to 126, he can go to the UK and fight fucking Ball in the UK, which will also be a huge fight. He also has Saudi Arabia behind him, so money is not an issue. For Tank Davis, he's got other things to worry about. Is he finally going to do what boxing fans have wanted him to do for a long time, which is unify titles, right? He's going to have three choices: Shakur, Keyshawn, and Loma. And we still have to see if Loma is going to come back or not. We still at this point aren't sure if he's going to retire, and that way Raymond Muratalla probably would become the opponent then. Or is he going to come back and actually, defend his IBF title? I hope he does. I look forward to it. I would be sad to see Lomachenko leave already. Roman Gonzalez is almost out of the game. Golovkin's out of the game. The sad thing about being a fan of boxers is that eventually they retire. And, you no longer get the opportunity to watch them ply their trade. And that's unfortunate. And, it happens to everyone. It is what it is. So, I just hope Lomachenko would have a couple more fights in 2025, right? But we will see. If he doesn't, he doesn't. There's nothing I can do or you, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, for Tank Davis, it still beckons the question: are you ever going to fight a unification fight? Since he's been at 135 pounds, he's failed to actually face a 135-pound world champion. He did not beat a champion to become the the WBA champion. He was elevated when Devin Haney left the division, right? And at this point, we're still waiting to see if he's going to fight a 135-pound champion or consistently pull up 130-pound champions or pull down 140-pound champions. But that's another story for another time. He does have a fight coming up, obviously, sometime soon, March 1st, pay-per-view, PBC, Gervonta Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach. I was watching Lamont Roach's younger brother fight on this Pro Box card today. 3-0. So obviously he's a long way from being relevant, but it's always good to see somebody's brother, be able to capitalize off of their older brother's success, right, and bring more wealth to the family. So I was happy to see that. It's good for Lamont Roach. Obviously, this is a big opportunity. He just went from a Pro Box fight, and now he's on PBC pay-per-view. Obviously going to get a career high payday to take on Tank Davis. I don't expect him to last 8 rounds versus Tank, but maybe he'll surprise me. Maybe he'll shock the world. I don't think so. This is a guy who lost to Jamal Herring, and I don't think Jamal Herring would last 5 rounds with Tank Davis. So, read into that as you may. Obviously, fights, styles do make fights. I do think Lamont Roach could make this difficult for Tank Davis to get him, to hunt him down if he's able to use his legs and his jab and control distance. We know Tank Davis isn't the most active fighter. What he tries to do is, get into range, read what you're doing, and eventually capitalize with counter shots to get you out of there. And that's exactly what I expect him to do in this fight. But the question is, what can Lamont Roach do to stretch this out and make it difficult for Tank Davis to actually land those big counter shots? This is not a fight anybody was asking for, right? Outside of what's his face, fucking, why I can't think of his name, the guy that's all over social media flogging Tank Davis accolades all over the place. Outside of him, I don't think there's really anybody in boxing that's super excited about this fight. Maybe even Knockout Boxing isn't that excited about it. But, it's good that he's staying busy. Obviously, last year he wasn't busy, right? With the whole prison situation, one victory, and then basically not getting a fight to end the year, unfortunately, which meant that now we get this Lamont Roach fight in March. We could have had it in October or November of last year. And by March, we could potentially be getting him in with somebody different. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. So all I can do is look forward to Tank Davis eventually working with other promoters to give us boxing fans what we want: great fights. And at that point, he can prove he's pound for pound one of the top 5 fighters in boxing. Right now, he's on the bottom half of my pound for pound list, but I do respect him. He does do what he needs to do against the opposition he's fighting. Very similar to what Golovkin did in his career, right? That's the irony. A lot of people were very critical of Golovkin, saying that, is he going to be so dominant when he steps up and faces elite fighters? Well, let's hold Tank Davis to the same criticism. Tank Davis has looked great, but is he going to do the same thing when he steps up to take on elite opponents, right? This is nothing different. I want to see Golovkin prove himself against great opponents, just like I want to see Tank Davis prove himself against great opponents. Like I want to see Loma, Shakur, Keyshawn, Inoue, Usyk, AJ, everybody in boxing prove themselves against great opponents. And sometimes that means you're going to get fucking beat. AJ getting beat by Daniel Dubois, right? It is what it is. So as a boxing fan, I'm just excited when great fights get made. And I do understand fighters I support aren't always going to be on the winning side. Unfortunately, that's sports, right? And I'm not like the kids I teach that are going to cry because they lose a game. No, I'm more mature than that. I've moved past that. It is what it is. You take the good with the bad. I just want to see Tank finally fight elite competition. So this card from the UK has been confirmed, and for American boxing fans, this is not going to be anything that they are too excited about. But if it's free from Ring Magazine on DAZN, why would you be sad about it? You have 5 very legitimate fights, 5 very legitimate fights, right? All really competitive. Potentially most of these 60-40, 55-45, 50-50 fights, right? All real competitive, where you could definitely make a case for any of the opponents that potentially end up winning in these 5 potential fights. For UK boxing fans, obviously they're going to be paying pay-per-view on DAZN for this. This is a card made and delivered for the UK boxing fan. When we think about obviously Vidal Riley, a guy who through social media has gotten a lot of talk for a long time, facing Siobhan Clark, UK Olympian, obviously just got battered in his last fight. His face was distorted, but to come back so quick, right, to try to redeem himself against a very good opponent like Riley, this is an intriguing fight, right? A real good fight for boxing fans. So I'm excited about that. I think it should be a good fight. We'll see how Riley comes back. I mean, how Clark comes back, because mentally you could be a little shell shocked and a little PTSD after that last fight. And then you get Chris Billum-Smith, obviously coming off of a loss to Zerto, jumping in against Brandon Glanton. Brandon Glanton, very tough, hard-punching fighter. Stylistically, this is a great matchup, right? I think a real 50-50 fight. Both guys are not the most technically brilliant, but both guys are hard punchers, tough motherfuckers that are just going to bring it. So that fight easily could be the best fight on this card. Liam Smith coming back against Aaron McKenna. This is probably the weakest fight on the card. If Liam Smith is who he once was, he should beat McKenna. But obviously, he's an older fighter. McKenna's younger, got a lot to prove, probably the hungrier fighter. So this fight could easily go either way, depending on where these two fighters are at this point of their career. Anthony Yarde versus Lyndon Arthur, the trilogy. Obviously, both guys have victories against each other, and this is just a good fight. Obviously it sells in the UK, and we know that Anthony Yarde is trying to position himself for big money fights at 175 pounds. Obviously, you think that a Lyndon Arthur fight should be the easiest opponent out of everybody on this card, in truth, because Anthony Yarde already beat him. And you think going into this fight, he's got the recipe down. So I do expect him to score a sensational knockout victory. And hopefully in 2025, we can get to see him fight for a world title once again, because he's deserving. His fight against Kovalev was great. His fight versus Beterbiev was great, right? When he jumped up and took on world champions, he was more than competitive and more than entertaining. And definitely, I want to see him in bigger and better fights moving forward. Then, of course, we get to the Eubank Ben fight, a fight that's been made because of the names of their father. This is a big money fight, so I can't hate on guys for getting paid. That's why this fight's getting made, because Eubank and Ben both understand the significance of their father's names, that recognition, and how based on that, you could put this fight together and do something significant. It's no different than Layla Ali did when she fought Frazier's daughter, right? Nobody really knew who Frazier's daughter was. She hadn't really done anything. She didn't really have the name recognition that Layla Ali did when Layla Ali was a world champion. But what she did have was that name recognition, right? Frazier, Ali, right? And they milked that and they utilized that to sell that fight. It was not a competitive fight. Ali was obviously a much better fighter than Frazier, but they used their father's names to make some money, and this is no different. I do expect Chris Eubank to be too much for Ben. Ben obviously is coming up from 147 to a catch weight. I think it's 160, but with a rehydration clause for Eubank. He's fought most of his career at 160, so with a rehydration clause, it shouldn't be that difficult. It's like fighting for the IBF title. They also have a rehydration clause. So there's nothing different there. You're fighting a smaller fighter who you're pulling up in weight. So the least you can do is give him a fighting edge or a fighting odds. But I do think Eubank is a far better fighter than Ben, far more skilled, far more experienced, been in with way better competition. So, if he's motivated and got his head on right, I do think this is easy work for him. This might be the most lopsided out of all the fights, to be fair. All these Japanese fights popping up on Batman Boxing. I watched them last night, but if you didn't, you can go there and watch them. So overall, this is a good card. I know American YouTubers are not going to really talk about anything on this card because they're not really boxing fans, right? They're American centric. And if it doesn't fucking revolve them, they don't care about it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of boxing fans that are like that. Then, of course, we got the super card, the biggest and baddest card in boxing history. Thank you, Turkey Al Sheikh and Saudi Arabia. The last crescendo is gigantic, huge, dynamic, fantastic. This is a fight we've been fucking, drooling over ever since it was first mentioned. And now, obviously, February is here. This fight on the 22nd, Buatsi versus Smith, great fight. I'm picking Smith to win. Zhang versus Kabial, great fight. I'm picking Kabial to win. Virgil Ortiz versus Madrimov, great fight. The fact this fight got made, wow, right? I'm picking Madrimov to win. Adames versus Hamza Shiraz, great fight, world title fight, sensational. I'm picking Hamza Shiraz to win. Shakur Stevenson versus Floyd Schofield. Obviously, this isn't the fight most of us wanted. As far as Shakur, we would have well preferred him to face a Tank Davis, which would be a super fight in the U.S. and definitely would not be on this card if that was the situation. That fight definitely would happen in the States because it's so significant. But unfortunately, that fight's not close to happening. So he's fighting a guy who was game, especially with what's his face pulling out, Zepeda. Zepeda didn't perform so well against Farmer, and his team is second guessing throwing them in with Shakur, an obviously far better fighter than than Farmer. And so it's no surprise their team is backtracking. No surprise at all. For Floyd Schofield, young guy living up to his word. He talked this shit and now he backed it by jumping in to replace Cepeda. So hats off to him. This is a huge opportunity. He is a Sean Porter type of fighter. So when we think about Sean Porter and two of his most successful fights in boxing history, his victory against Alexander and his victory versus Malignaggi, right? Two far better boxers than Porter, far slicker, better jabs, better boxing fundamentals, better footwork. They're just way better boxers fundamentally than Sean Porter was. But yet, what they could not deal with was Sean Porter's physicality and his aggressiveness and his volume. And he was able to roll over those two fighters. So Floyd Schofield could learn a lot from those two fights and bring that into a Shakur Stevenson fight and potentially pull one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. I don't expect it to happen. He's a little young and inexperienced to do what Porter did. But to be fair, when Porter did that, it wasn't the same Porter that we knew later on that fought Spence and fought Bud Crawford. It was well before that. So it's a good fight. It should be entertaining. I think Floyd Schofield is definitely going to make Shakur work. And potentially we could see the best version of Shakur. Then, of course, you got Dubois Parker. Oh, my God. I was talking about that this was the fight that needed to happen. I'm so excited that this fight is getting done. Parker is super motivated. Super motivated. For him, this is a no-brainer. He should beat Dubois. He's a far better boxer than Dubois, right? He's never been destroyed in the manner that Daniel Dubois has been. He's never had his heart questioned, right? He's tough, well-skilled, experienced, has a great resume, and this is the kind of fight that he definitely can pull the upset. And while I have Shakur favored to win this, I am edging Dubois based on his rocket rise to fame to beat Parker in what should be a sensational fight. So far, out of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fights, I have 3 upsets, in a sense: Smith, Kabial, and Madrimov. I do think Shakur is the most likely to win his fight convincingly. And the Parker Dubois fight, I could easily lean towards picking Parker, the underdog. I could easily lean towards that. And I would not be surprised at all if he does exactly that. But I'm leaning towards the fighter that's really on a hot string right now, and that is Dubois. But, I would say in the ring, Parker is a far smarter fighter, far more cerebral, and has everything he needs to do to pull this upset. And in truth, I would be super excited if he did it, right? And I'd love to see Usyk fight Parker for undisputed. It's a fight Parker deserves, right? So then, of course, we get to the rematch in one of the fights that I was most excited about in 2024, and that was Beterbiev versus Bivol. I felt the fight easily could have been a draw. I had Beterbiev edging the fight based on the last 3 rounds. Nothing against Bivol. I thought Bivol fought great, right? And I expect Beterbiev to be better, even though he's older going into this fight. But the fact he was coming off of an injury, a knee surgery, prior to the first fight against Bivol, I do think he's going to be far more mobile and able to track Bivol down and put more pressure on him leading into this rematch. So I am edging Beterbiev to get the decisive victory against Bivol in a rematch. And I definitely hope that's what happens. If he wins, I would not be surprised if he just drops all his titles and potentially moves in another direction, potentially to cruiserweight. And that would be great, because right now, currently, the 175-pound division's got a lot of talent. When you think about Bivol, Benavidez, Morrell, and other fighters currently in that division that really are physically in their primes, right? And you'd love to get these guys all mixing and matching against each other. For Beterbiev, if he beats Bivol, what else does he have to prove at 175 pounds, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I would not hate him for taking on the winner of Morrell Benavidez. I would love it, to be fair. If that happens, which I don't think that team, the PBC team, is going to be chasing him if he stops or dominates Bivol. I just don't see that happening. But if it does, whew, I will give everybody praise for making that fight. I think, wow, that's exactly what we need, because that would be fantastic, right? But I just don't see the PBC going towards him if he does that. If Bivol wins, I think that's probably more likely to happen. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. But overall, this card is just fucking great. Fantastic card. I'm super excited about this card. I definitely will be going live, even though, yeah, the time frame is terrible. I hate these Saudi Arabian fights, not because I'm watching boxing in the mid-afternoon, like right now when I'm making this video, which was fantastic, but that it's super early in the morning, 1 o'clock to like 7 o'clock in the morning. So my whole night is gone. And then I have to go to work on Monday. Oh my God. I'm too old to deal with this shit. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Great news. This is probably the most sensational news labeled right now. Ennis versus Stanionis in unification, right? IBF, WBA unification fight. This is exactly what Boots Ennis and most boxing fans have been hoping for a long time. We were super excited to see Stanionis fight Virgil Ortiz. Unfortunately, that fight didn't happen. So the fact that Stanionis is finally getting a great fight, that's great for him. He deserves it. And for Boots, he deserves this as well, right? He didn't take the Virgil Ortiz fight at 154. He had to get a unification fight. If he didn't, people would be super critical of him. If he would jump straight into a Teofimo Lopez fight after all that talk about wanting unification, once again, people would be shitting all over him. Very critical, right? The fact that he's doing exactly what he said he's doing or wanted to do in getting a Stanionis fight, people will be more than happy if he fights Teofimo Lopez next, right? Because we understand what's going to happen is Teo fighting him, Haney, Ryan Garcia. The winners are going to match up at 147 pounds for some sensational matchups at 147 pounds, really bringing a lot more energy to that welterweight division. Howard, obviously, there's a fight I was just looking at as potentially happening, and I do think it's probably most likely to happen. And that's not a unification with the winner of this, but it's a potential fight between Jin Sasaki, right, who just fought last night on the Inoue undercard. He is definitely a beatable fighter, but exciting, aggressive, nonstop action, comes right at you, throws big shots. He's a exciting fighter, right? Very Mexican style, not to use negative connotations, but he's a guy that offensively is very good, defensively is a little lacking. You throw him in with Howard, a young fighter with not much of experience, but who's also an exciting fighter. I think that's a fucking great fight for ESPN and a great fight for Howard to make another title defense. And he might as well do that because, I think he wins that fight. He's going to win the fight, I think, against his next opponent. So that's two defenses of his WBO title. And at that point, you get a bit more experience under your belt. And now you jump on and join this group of welterweights for unification. Sensational. Sensational, right? There's nothing wrong with letting a guy grow a little bit and let fights nurture a little bit, because at this point, nobody really knows who Howard is. Boots could fight him, but would that really benefit him? Truthfully, it's nice he'd get the unification fight, but if he destroys the guy nobody knows, it's not going to help him really that much. A Haney fight or a Ryan Garcia, even though I don't think Ryan Garcia is going to beat Haney in the rematch, and a Teofimo Lopez fight, those fights are going to elevate him into pound for pound superstar status in American boxing. And I do expect Boots to be the one who walks away with the victories against all those opponents. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. It's good news. Sometime this April, another fight that's being talked about, and this is a fight that hardcore fans, especially of the lower weight divisions, have been critical of Bam Rodriguez about, because we definitely see that he's been basically sidestepping Junto Nakatani for quite a while now. Obviously, when they were both, Junto was 112-pound champion. Bam was 108-pound contender. Instead of moving up and taking on Junto to become a champion, he jumped up another division to take on two old fighters. Mind you, good paydays, good name recognition. So you couldn't really hate on him too much because of that. But then, instead of staying at 115 pounds and being there to challenge against Junto Nakatani, who moved up to that division, he moved down, sidestepping Junto to go down, chase titles that in America were insignificant. Sure, what's his face, the UK fighter, had a good UK fan base, but Americans weren't that familiar with Sonny Edwards, right? So moving down to fight him, it's not as if it was a significant victory, even though he beat him in unification. That's great. Something Tank Davis has never done. Unify. Something Junto hasn't done yet. Unify. But Junto moving up to your division and then you moving down, you jumping above. I'm holding Bam to the same criticism I held Inouye to. When Inouye jumped over Roman Gonzalez to go fight a 40-year-old in a division, two divisions above, I was also critical. You ducked the biggest name in small boxing in Roman Gonzalez to fight a good, solid fighter, veteran, right, who was definitely the number one fighter at 115 pounds, but was 39, 40 years old, and not nearly the name that Roman Gonzalez was. And this is no different for Bam. You jump over Junto to take on name opponents, but old again. And then when Junto jumps up to your weight division, now a potential unification fight between you guys can be made. What do? You jump down in weight. Then once Junto moves up to 118, all of a sudden you go back up to 115 to take on another old fighter who was inactive in Juan Francisco Estrada. Right? And now you want to unify. Oh, now, of course, now you want to unify now that Junto's no longer in the weight class. You could move up and challenge Junto because he's the WBC champion. You're the WBC champion, right? But instead of doing that, you're talking about unifying in a division where there's not really any top level fights for you to unify against. There's an unknown South African fighter that nobody knows. You're not going to make big money against him. The only thing good about that fight is you probably don't have to pay him much money. Then you got Ioka, who lost to Puma. So Ioka doesn't have a world title. Puma has the title, but he just pulled out of the rematch. And then who has the WBA title? I can't even think off the top of my head who even had. Oh, Puma has that. So who's got the IBF title? I don't even know who has the IBF title. So there you go right there. So you could unify against these fighters, but it's not going to be a big fight. For American boxing fans, they don't watch these smaller weight classes. You fighting unknown opponents doesn't make much sense. If you fought Roman Gonzalez, sure, he's old, but at least he's got name recognition. You go to Saudi Arabia, you fight Roman Gonzalez on one of these Saudi cards. Both guys get paid big money. It's a fight that translates. Fans would get excited. The new versus the old, changing of the guards, right? The dominant small fighter from the past fighting the dominant small fighter of the present. Great optics, sells well, very exciting. But recently in an article, Jesse Bam Rodriguez's team just came out to talk about how potentially they may move up to 118 if there's no fights at 115 pounds they can do. So the potential matchup between Jesse Bam Rodriguez and Junto Nakatani may be something we could potentially get before the end of 2025. And think about how great that optics would be. If Jesse Rodriguez moves up to challenge Junto, especially if Junto ends up unifying during this time and is a unified champion, Bam moves up to challenge this unified three-weight world champion to try to be a three-weight world champion himself, right? That would be a great fight. A fight you could easily do in the U.S. Junto, as I stated earlier, trains and lives in the U.S. Bam obviously trains and lives in the U.S. as well. You could do this fight in Vegas. Oh my God, it's a great matchup. I definitely think it should be the headline fight on a fight in Vegas. I would be super stoked to see this matchup. And at this time, it's a real 50-50 fight. I don't know who I'm picking to win that fight, in all fairness, right? And then if Junto wins, we know what his next goal would be, to move up to 122 and challenge himself against Inoue. That would be two pound for pound top fighters, right? I wonder how critical people could be against Junto for beating a Bam at 118 and then moving up to 122 to take on a Inoue. I mean, isn't that what fucking we want in boxers, to challenge themselves against the biggest, baddest motherfuckers around? That shit's serious. And for Bam to move up and become a three-weight world champion by beating Junto, whew, that would be huge. That would easily be the most significant victory of his career. And then a possibility of him jumping up and taking on Inoue. Even though it would be a big jump in a sense after only one fight at 118, that fight would be so big in America. I said, of course, that Junto and Inoue in Japan is the biggest fight in Japanese history. But Bam Rodriguez beating Junto and then moving up to try to become a four-weight world champion by taking on Inoue in Vegas, it would probably be the biggest small fight in boxing history, probably bigger than Carvajal versus what's his face? Rodriguez, what's his name? Gonzalez, which was huge. Both guys got paid $1 million for that fight. Obviously, did rematch. It was very significant. If you don't know, go check those fights out. Great fights. Michael Carvajal, U.S. Olympic fighter, taking on a great fighter in Gonzalez. But Bam Rodriguez, the American, versus Inoue, the monster. We can only dream. We can only dream to hope that in early 2026, that potentially could be a fight to make. And then all these people wanting Inoue to move up to 126 and 130. It's like, why? If he fights Junto, that is two pound for pound fighters matching up. If he fights Bam, who beat Junto, you're talking about two top 5 pound for pound fighters matching up. Man, if that doesn't get you excited, you're not really a boxing fan, because I don't know what would get you excited. But just the possibility of this makes me fucking, get a little wet. Just saying. But let me know in the comment section below, how would you like this sort of thing to pan out, move forward? And then, of course, the news that we've heard recently is that Turki Al-Sheikh is going to be getting a percentage of DAZN, and that he's not going to buy the PBC. I heard rumors that he's going to buy out the PBC, but was it Ring IQ? I think it was Ring IQ. He broke it down a little better and put it more in perspective. Why would you buy the PBC name? Turki Al-Sheikh and DAZN doesn't need the PBC name. The PBC is in debt for millions and millions of dollars. So if you buy them, you're now inheriting that debt. And that would be a fucking stupid business decision. And I don't think the Saudis make stupid business decisions. So I definitely don't think Saudi Arabia is going to buy the PBC. They may work with the PBC, like they work with Matchroom, Top Rank, Golden Boy, and the rest. And those guys are still in control in a sense. They're kind of the promoters, and he is, the platform in a sense, even though DAZN's a platform. But he's going to own 10% of DAZN from what is being talked about. Own 10% of DAZN, own Ring Magazine, have working relationships with every major promoter. That, my friends, is beautiful. Obviously, also working in conjunction with the sanctioning bodies. So hopefully they can clear up all that shit and make it more transparent, and something that boxing fans, especially casual boxing fans, can understand. Because really, that's the issue. You and me, I mean, we are hardcore boxing fans. So, we know exactly what's going on. But for casuals, they're easy to fool. They don't really know exactly what's going on. And that's unfortunate. But what Ring IQ was talking about is that they wouldn't necessarily buy out the PBC name and the brand. What they would do is buy out the contracts for fighters. And that way they could have these fighters fight on Ring Magazine fights, right? And with these tournament settings that they're talking about, doing an American tournament and a UK tournament, which obviously we hope would end up crossing over into dynamic super fight crossover matchups. But that's exactly what we've already seen Saudi Arabia do now. They've worked with tons of PBC fighters who've crossed over and went on their events. So, it's just maybe buying out their contracts. But let's see how that works out. But it's good news nonetheless. This is Ring Magazine's current pound for pound list. And we know Ring Magazine is now obviously being controlled by Turkey, which is good news. Any new blood and money into the game. The Ring Magazine is now promoting fights, right, which is great. Now they have a vested interest. People may say that's a conflict of interest, but we'll deal with that as it moves forward. I don't always like to think about these kind of things because the truth is, Ring Magazine putting money into the sport is great, and it makes them far more entertaining and more profitable. The problem with a magazine is that people don't really buy magazines anymore. Like, what do I have here? I'm trying to make a statement. Here we go. Un momento, por favor. Why is my 5G so slow? But as that's uploading, I think, I don't know what's going on. Why it's so temperamental. Here we go. Oh, what's going on? Why is it so temperamental? Quite in. Oh, here. So obviously, I still buy magazines, right? Pocket Mags, great app. You can do that. Obviously, these are not Ring Magazine magazines, but now you don't need paper. You can actually buy online, watch on your iPad, watch obviously on your iPad, Kindle readers and things of that nature. It's much easier. And obviously, people are sort of trying to break into that situation. We know with Ring Magazine, obviously they're trying to get more attention in that sense as well. Right? Ring Magazine, your account is almost ready for you. So, them having online magazines as well as paper magazines, which they're trying to turn into sort of collectibles, is sensational. But, if you're going to rely strictly on paper magazines, it's probably not that successful. I still buy paper magazines. I just bought Slam magazine recently, and obviously that was great because I was in the hospital for 4 days getting my gallbladder removed. So I had some reading material, and so that was good. But yes, these are pound for pound current rankings. And while I do think that Crawford probably should be above Inouye on this ranking, it's not that big of a situation. The fact that all three of the guys we think are the three best fighters are still in the top three, it pretty much shows you the consistency. Usyk number one, I find it hard to argue that he doesn't deserve to be there. Inouye at number two, Crawford at three, fine, you could flip flop them. I think that would probably be better, but nonetheless, they're both right there, neck and neck. If Canelo goes on and faces Canelo, who's number seven, and beats him, I would then have Canelo jump over Usyk for number one. If he loses, I would have Canelo jump into the top five, and I'd have Bud Crawford fall out of the top five, right? Obviously, Beterbiev deserves to be number four after his victory against Bivol, who is number five. Jesse Rodriguez at number six after beating Estrada is sensational. But, for him to move up this list, a fight against number nine, Junto Nakatani, would do that. You beat Junto, and then I think you jump right into that top five and, maybe above Beterbiev, right? Depending on how sensational you look. Obviously, Beterbiev is 40, 41 years old. So, we know he's not at his best right now, whereas Bam is literally coming into his prime. For Bivol, you beat Beterbiev, you take his position. For Saul Canelo-Alvarez, you beat Bud Crawford. I definitely think you slide into the top five. But I don't know if you go above Inouye or Usyk based on beating Crawford, who's jumping up two weight divisions, right? I don't think you deserve that much credit. Maybe you go in front of Beterbiev, and in front of Jesse Bam Rodriguez, so that you're at number 4, or sorry, number 3. But it is what it is. For Tank Davis, all we want to see him do is actually fight top opponents. Shakur, Keyshawn, Lomachenko, right? If he can go up to 140, take on a Devin Haney, a Tio at 140, even though the time for that is kind of falling apart. Those guys are moving up to 147 pounds, moving in a whole new direction, which leaves the potential opponents for Tank Davis limited. Loma might retire, and then really the only real legitimate top-level elite fight you have, a guy who easily could be on this list as well, is Shakur Stevenson. You beat him, I think you definitely catapult right into the top 5 of this list. If Shakur beats you, he definitely catapults into the top 5 on this list. Boots beating Haney, beating Stanionis, right? He gets on this list and becomes a significant addition to the pound-for-pound list. For Devin Haney, you beating Ryan Garcia solidifies you on this list. You beat a Boots Ennis or a Tio, and all of a sudden you become a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter on this list. And the fact that we can talk about that and see how these fighters can move up this list, not based on race or, country affiliation or any of this fanboy shit, but literally beating guys that justifiably have you jump up this list, guys that are on this list, right? It's easy to understand. And I think that's how these pound for pound lists should be. Easily understandable and transparent. Not people talking about, well, if they were the same size or on the eye test, blah, 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 blah. No, you're being biased. You're only picking people based on the fact you like them, they look like you, and things of that nature, right? Nobody else would have the same opinion as you. Then, of course, we talk about fights that are happening this weekend. From the U.S., Vegas, Diego Pacheco versus Steve Nelson. I think it's a great fight. I think Diego fucking stops Nelson. Andy Cruz versus Saucedo. Cruz is getting a lot of conversation potentially to get a Keyshawn Davis fight. Well, you got to win these fights, and you got to do it sensationally. Because at this point, you've had less than 5 professional fights, right? You need to start fighting and beating name opponents. Ernesto Machado, one of the most talked about up-and-coming young fighters in boxing, taking on Jose Pedraza, right? He's taking on a name opponent, right? Underneath of that, you have quite a few real high-profile prospects. Dev, the Indian fighter who was an Olympian, Nishant Dev, right? He's one of the most highly acclaimed Indian fighters in boxing history, maybe the highest acclaimed amateur Indian fighter coming into the pro game. This is a guy that Matchroom and boxing is hoping becomes a superstar, because currently the biggest population globally is India, who just recently surpassed China. So, him becoming a superstar is great. A lot of money and attention from more than 1 billion people in India, turning him into a superstar. And we know India primarily has always been a cricket country, right? They love cricket. But boxing has really been growing the past decade. If you've watched any amateur boxing, you know that India has a lot of really good boxers. And the women's team as well has a lot of very good Indian female boxers, which obviously is groundbreaking for India and just the religion background of a lot of these countries, right? Where women are obviously sometimes second-class citizens. So that's good news for them as well. Then, of course, you have Shakur's cousin, Shaquin Moses, who's going to be on this card as well. And from what people are talking about Moses, he's a real one. And it's going to be great to watch his progression move forward. So we'll see what he does. Obviously, it's early in his career. I think this may be his debut, if I'm not wrong. On the UK card, obviously, this is not the biggest card. This is mostly full of domestic level UK fighters. The one guy on this card who people think potentially could be world level is Dalton Smith. He's going to be fighting a French fighter who is European level, right? And obviously Dalton Smith's early in his career. Fighting European level fighters is what they do in the UK. You fight domestic opponents, become a domestic champion. Then you go on and fight European opponents, become a European champion, and then you go on to fight world level opponents. So they're moving him the way most UK boxers. Garbage truck. Hey, Oakland. Uh, get moved. So obviously, we expect him to do sensational against this guy and then move forward into bigger and better things. I know Eddie Hearn was talking about him potentially fighting for a world title before the end of 2025. Who are they talking about? Him being in line for that 140-pound WBC title, right? Which is obviously going to be happening soon. Ellie Scottney is also on this for women's boxing fans. She's a name with some name recognition. The rest of these people are far more UK-based fighters maybe I'm not that familiar with. So if you want to know more, check out some of the UK YouTubers, and I'm sure they will break this down with a lot more insight than myself. But let's move forward. So today on Pro Box, I was watching this card. Obviously, Naji Lopez, we're talking about 175 pounds and the great young group of fighters currently at that weight class. That's this kid. He just had his most significant victory today, looking good. He's exactly what you think of a top prospect. Tall, long, great stick, power. You know, if you got a great stick and you got power and you can move, you got everything in your toolbox to go on to become a world champion. The one thing you need to check afterwards is your heart and your chin, right? If you got a good heart and a great chin, then the world is your oyster. And with Naji Lopez, he's a real one. Currently, he's 13-0 with 10 knockouts. Looks good. Looks good. If you haven't checked him out, free on YouTube. You can go check it out. Pro Box. Another guy that really looks the part as well for 154 pounds is Terencecrawford. Currently 12-0 with what? 10 knockouts? I can't even see that number. It's too small for my eyes. But he's also looked like Lopez. Great jab, good power, look real good. He looks the works, right? Obviously, the level of opponent he's been in with is far lower than who Naji Lopez fought today. A real veteran at 175 pounds. But, you know, the future looks bright for these two Pro Box fighters. Obviously, Pro Box is doing it right. You sign guys like this with real potential. You develop them on Pro Box. And then if they go on to become world champions, that's going to fucking really pull a lot more money and a lot more attention to the whole Pro Box platform, which you need platforms like Pro Box because they don't have all the money in the world, but guys like this, if they were fighting on bigger promotional cards, they would be so low on the cards. Maybe you'd never even notice them. You wouldn't really get to see them fight. So this is a much better sort of direction for them. Like Lamont Roach, who just fought recently on Pro Box, had a significant victory and now is getting a huge fight against Tank Davis. This heavyweight matchup was also in the cards. Jeremiah Milton, who looks the part, but unfortunately was upset by this young guy right today who reminded me of Ernie Shavers, the way he's fighting, the bald head, the beard, the hooks, and his hooks are good, man. Some speed, some power. The kid looked good, but he was kind of a late replacement in this fight. Came in real heavy. I think he was 280 something, and it showed. His gas tank was, real struggling to get through these rounds. He dropped Milton early, I think, in the first round. But Milton, then made adjustments, tried to keep his distance. But the problem with Milton is, unlike Wright, he doesn't have that explosive power, right? And he wasn't able to just utilize his jab well enough to control the distance, unlike Valsaint and Lopez, who controlled their opponents with their jabs, right? He had the potential to do it, but was unable to do it. So ended up moving to 11-1 in a disappointing performance, to be fair, because he was the favorite. He was the guy that they were hoping would win to bring some of that heavyweight money to Pro Box. As they said, Paulie and Algieri early on in the card when they were introducing it, they were talking about heavyweight money, and you can't really necessarily bring heavyweights to Pro Box because it costs too much money. But to develop them within that's what you need to do. But unfortunately, Milton dropped that ball. If I was his team, I'd be pushing for a Wright rematch. But Wright will come in at 260, have a way better gas tank, better volume. He's the much more explosive puncher, faster hands. And as I said, if he's got footwork and able to like come in, he showed good angles to move to the side. If he's able to do that at a high level with a high punch output, he's dangerous. As far as these two guys being the next great American heavyweight, I don't know about that. But let me know in the comment section below if you watch them and you think potentially they could do that. I don't think so, but obviously it's early in their careers. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But overall, it was a great fight card. There was a lot of other young fighters on the card as well. As I mentioned, Lamont Roach's brother was on the card as well. I'm looking forward to the fights this weekend and the fights upcoming in February. Let me know what you think about all of this. Leave your comments below, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thanks for watching. Remember to